This is good. Glad the previous group generated all this buzz. Get even more ideas floating. Okay, our group is called the Rough Customers. And it consists of myself, Brett, Bruce over here in the purple, Dion, the pink, Naki, green over there, and Hudson in the green stripe. Okay, so there's 5 of us that work together on a design that had a different set of goals, which I'm going to present. The goals, as has been mentioned by the previous group, really drive the whole rest of the process. So at each stage, we are circling back on the goals. Just for your visual reference, last group was like this. We are going to invert that. It's just how we develop our charts so that nobody's confused. The house here is here. This is Houston Road along the top. Okay, so this is actually the south. We're used to seeing north up, but this is our orientation for all our charts that we're going to present. Okay, so very quickly I'm going to summarize the goals and the process of site analysis and how we came up with the emerging patterns. And then I'm going to turn it over to my teammates who are going to describe the overall design concept, both with regard to infrastructure, and you'll see why that was an important factor in our design, as well as the patterns that emerged. And then, as you saw with the previous group, we will get to the patch design as an overall concept for the entire site, and then some of the specifics on a couple of the, actually 3 of the patches. Okay, our goals were to design for 2 families. Okay, right now there's a single family on the site, but one of our working assumptions is, how would the site look if it was designed to accommodate room for 2 families with certain criteria, that it would include annual vegetable production sufficient to feed the 2 families and also have a surplus to share. Okay, so we're really designing for abundance. Also, we want to include some agroforestry elements and a surplus related to those, nuts, of a diversity of products that can come, high protein, oil, starch, diversity of fruits and berries, a variety of perennial vegetables, and you'll see in one of our patch designs that the entire patch is designed around perennial vegetables, and also producing artist materials. Jen, as an artist, that's going to be very important, as well as fuel. And in achieving this, particularly the year-round productivity of the land, we want to do it with 2 very, what would seem to be impossible criteria, but we're going to design to accommodate these. One is that we're emphasizing low maintenance. Okay, we're going to design to produce all these things, but not create an enormous maintenance burden on the residents and the others involved with the property. And also, as I mentioned, year-round food production without increasing heating or cooling demand. We want it to be sustainable in the sense of also being efficient in the use of energy resources. So you'll see in our design a lot of emphasis on solar, solar design and utilizing that both with regard to the plants and the built environment. And then other goals that came up from the interview process, which we're looking for aesthetic beauty, self-sufficiency, and also meeting social needs, recreation and so forth, and also just resiliency in this scenario of a post-peak oil that is the larger context. To take all of that and reduce it down into a statement, we visualize it, we state it in present tense, active voice, okay? And with more time, we probably could have reduced this down further. It's a long sentence, but I'll read it for those of you in the back. Okay, we co-inhabit a productive and resilient edible landscape in a self-sufficient manner that meets the physical and social needs of our 2 families on a year-round basis, creates abundance and beauty without excessive maintenance burden. You can see in that statement how we've woven in, like a tapestry, all the goals. Jumping right ahead to the process of site analysis and assessment. as you've seen from here, this is the same base map, I'm sticking here, on the bottom. So we use this as our starting point, and then we use these transparent sheets of paper as overlays, and we go through many of these in this conceptual stage. The idea there is to go through the various, what are called levels of permanence. And those are different features that we first plot out separately and then go through a second round where we extract from that initial analysis those features that are most important that seem to be showing patterns that overlay. So I'll just mention what's on here. I won't go into all the detail. But basically, we're looking at landform, water, axis and circulation, microclimates, infrastructure, zones of use, and aesthetics. Okay?
We've already gone 10 minutes.
Okay. So now I'm going to hand it over to Bruce, who's going to pick that from here.
This is time remaining, by the way.
Oh, time remaining.
This is time remaining.
Oh, okay. We're on track.
Looking at the basic site layout, we sort of looked at the drainage flowing this way, the road, of course, some large trees at the front, and we ended up, we explored 3 locations for the new residents, here, and back on the footprint. We ended up putting the new second residence here for a number of reasons. We looked at the privacy issues, the drainage issues with a shared septic, which is you can't really plant on, as has been mentioned previously. Access from public to private, and looking at kind of a shared garden space here. There is solar exposure under the tree canopy for the winter, so we looked at having passive solar container gardens or winter gardens in the houses. We looked at having cold frames and winter greenhouses here that would slide away from the house in the summer, so they'd be accessible from the house, and then help heat the house, and then in the summer they'd be hot houses. And then we looked at having an outdoor area here for recreational activities and social activities. We're using the existing footprint of some of these buildings for a potager loft, artist loft, bunkie, more of a peak oil scenario, cisterns for water, and I guess, is there anything else? I think that's it.
So, I'm going to talk for just a minute here about something Dave talked about quite a bit, which was pattern language. So, just very briefly, you can read a book, like this thick about this. But patterns are looking for archetypes or primal patterns. And a good pattern is alive, it forms a living whole, it resolves conflicting forces, it's unique each time you do it, and as Dave said, it feels good. And this is a quote from Dave, so I'm just going to read it. It says, "A pattern language is like any language. You select from the language which pieces you want to use to achieve your particular ends. Instead of words or phrases, though, and this is the important part, this language uses patterns as the elements we combine. To speak our minds, compose a poem, or create a forest garden." So that's from Dave, and I put some patterns on here. You can see this is a more square type of pattern. These are more organic. We've got one straight line, we've got undulation, we've got spiral, we've got patterns that look almost like leaves. And you can see, and you'll see what we used. We used both of these, but you can see that these create a different sense of the space and a very different use of the space. And probably a lot of us are more accustomed to these kind of square patterns. That's what our fields look like. That's often what our gardens look like. So we were, all of us in the group, were trying to respond and allow some of those patterns that are already in the landscape to bubble up as we worked. So you can see up here we have more square patterning. Part of this was to respond to the neighbors because some of the neighbors aren't really as comfortable with some of the things that are going on the property. There's a yurt and some of the neighbors haven't liked that. So this was a little more conventional, more square, and of course the houses, the conventional houses are going to be built in a more square pattern, and the greenhouses are going to have a more square pattern. As we got more onto the property, you can see we've got some radial gardens with spirals in the middle, and then a lot of these more organic shapes kind of bubbled up as we walked around the space and as we looked at the space. The undulating pathways and the rounded areas kind of really came from the landscape, and I think that you'll probably see that in a lot of the other things that the other maps that people made. So that's all I'll say.
Well, I'll just very quickly, since we're pressed for time, but I'll just point out what some of the emergent patterns on the landscape pointed out to us in terms of how we want to organize some of these things. As Dion just mentioned, we have kind of a more social space, a little bit more managed conventional space to block out any inquisitive minds that may not be so interested in seeing some of these stranger experimental gardens, and the intensively managed zones for each house where you might have annual vegetables and things that we're more used to seeing. One thing that was kind of interesting is we decided to put in a pond or a wetland area here, kind of where the drainage is heading. We already have a run going here, so we just extend that out a little bit, and as we're reforesting this area, we have savanna grass now, and we want to bring the forest edge up and create a lot more habitat for nut trees, native species that are edible, medicinal, utilitarian in various ways that are going to be helpful for us. And in doing this, we've created even more habitat for all kinds of beneficial animals, amphibians, snakes, etc., and species that we may not otherwise have places to put on the land. Much like the group before us, we had kind of keyed in on this area here, which was the shady butternut, as somewhere that we'd like to congregate over the course of the week. We were always finding ourselves there. It was a great place to hang out, so we wanted to keep that as a bit of a forest lawn again, somewhere, a social area, more wooded than perhaps that. Next to that, we had a very sunny area that we decided to keep as a perennial vegetable garden. And next to that, where the apple trees were, we're going to develop that into an orchard, but I'll get into more detail about that.
Okay.
There it is.